Okay, sloppy language leads to sloppy thought. Language is the scaffolding of thought, by putting words to concepts that the concepts can then flow and connect to each other. And depending on the label that you put on the concepts, if you fail, it can cause a failure to distinguish if you don't label enough. If you don't put the mental tags enough, then you're gonna get sloppy thought. An example of this that is a non-controversial example would be the color Oi, Romanji Aoi. And this is the Japanese did not distinguish the colors, what we would call green and blue. Okay. To them, what we call green and what we call blue was to them a uniform shade of Oi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly or not. Now, what I've noticed, and maybe I'm looking for it because I know this fact, but when I look at Japanese art, old Japanese art, and I see the color of the ocean as not blue as it is in Western art. It's not blue. It's a mixture between green and blue, and an intermediate mixture between the two. Sometimes the water is more green than blue. Now, maybe that's actually a more accurate representation of what the ocean looks like. If you actually, maybe the ocean, especially by the coast, if you actually go down to it, you see more green than blue. Maybe that is the case. But I will say, if you don't have separate labels for the colors green and blue, well, then you're not going to see them as being as separate. You're going to see them as being the same color. Now, that's not a particularly important example of I don't know if I would call that sloppy language, because we can't really say that that's wrong, because where you define colors is such a subjective thing. But it is an example, at least, of how language colors your conception of things. Now, what if I said to you, the viewer, that you're a pedophile? But don't worry. By pedophile, I simply mean pedo, children, and phile as in philic, as in being fond of. You are fond of children, right? Most people are. Most people are fond of children, at least at first, until they start throwing their tantrums and all, right? But most people are fond of children. Most people like kids. Okay, and so now you know that that's what I mean by pedophile. I don't mean anything sexual. Okay. So when I call you a pedophile in front of 100 people, don't worry, because you know what I mean. And if I call you a racist in front of 100 people, don't worry, because you know what I mean by that, right? That's a problem, right? Because when you call someone a racist, well, what does that mean? Now, one objection I want to put here, and kind of nip this in the bud, is that the reason I'm talking about this is because I personally get called a racist on a regular occasion. And that is certainly true. And so, therefore, I'm a vested interest, and you should dismiss what I have to say, right? That's the way the argument goes. Well, let's turn it around. You have people who use the term racism all the time. Perhaps they're vested interests because they use it all the time, and they want to continue to use this word, right? They want to use this word as a power word, as a control word, right? Because if you can say that X person is racist, has it ever been used in a positive sense? You say, oh, I like you, you're a racist. Maybe that you can find a few odd occasions in which that is the case, but overwhelmingly, it's meant to denigrate. It is a smear, right? And so when you're using a smear on someone, well, what exactly does that mean? Okay, and so what you have someone who has been smeared, and now they're contesting the smear. Oh, well, you having been smeared are now a vested interest, and so we should dismiss your arguments, right? Well, the person who made the smear is just as, if not more, vested as well. Okay, so this being vested in racism, it cuts both ways, right? So this idea that I am the only one who has a vested stake in this, and so I am the only one who is going to be biased, is such a narrow view, and I find this kind of narrowness in people who hold who hold common popular conceptions of anything. They tend to have a very narrow. They tend to be unaware of their own one-sidedness and their own prejudices. Now, the problem, well, one major problem with racism is that it means different things to different people. Okay, for example, believing in the existence of race can be considered racist. Okay. Supporting affirmative action is racist. Opposing affirmative action is racist. and not supporting or opposing, or like not seeing race, not seeing race in any way. That's racist because that's called colorblind racism. You're ignoring past injustices and therefore giving a free pass to white people who really need to be soaked in order to recoup the past injustices. So that's colorblind racism, right? If you think I'm making up the concept of colorblind racism, well, just use Google. Google can help in these kinds of things. How about sex? Well, if you're attracted to people of other races and you're a white male, well, there are those who will say, well, that is a form of domination that you get. You get your jollies from the male, fucking the submissive female of the other races, kind of like raping and pillaging, that the old colonialists supposedly used to do. To a degree, these kinds of things were always done, but anyway, I don't want to get into that. But on the other hand, if you're not sexually attracted, let's say you're a white male and you're not sexually attracted to black females, that's pretty common, okay? But what is that? Well, you could say that's racism. Oh, you have these Eurocentric standards of beauty. You don't think that black females are beautiful. You think that your failure to be attracted to them is a sign of European supremacism. Though if you are attracted to them, well, then you're just trying to dominate them, right? That's so either way, it's bad. And if you don't see it at all, well, you're just colorblind racist. So, and then we go into the matter. So that's one problem with racism. Another problem would be the degree, you could say. Because let's say that you believe in the existence of race. Is that racist? Yes or no? Okay, so let's say you believe in, cognitive differences in cognitive capacity between the races. Is that racist? Yes or no? Okay. So in that sense, there's a problem with that, with the cognitive capacity thing, because that's a question that could be true or false. I'm reminded about the Jason Richwine affair when he made an article about Hispanics having lower IQ and that they should not be brought in. And there was a response to that saying, to Richwine saying, not only is Richwine's thesis racist, but it is also wrong. Now, that is a very profound statement for reasons that the author is probably unaware of. It is racist, but also wrong. Now, this opens the possibility that a racist belief could be a correct belief, and so to avoid being racist, one would have to be wrong, right? Because what he said in that title was that whether or not something is racist does not necessarily mean that it is true or false. Racist does not necessarily mean false, which is why he had to say that not only is it racist, but it is also false, because being racist does not imply false. See? So that's another problem, is that one could have a true belief, and in order to avoid being racist, one must have to embrace an incorrect belief. That's another problem we have there. Now, some may say, well, that's what the author of this article in The Atlantic had to say, but in my view, if it is a correct belief, then believing it is not racist. Right? Hate and malice towards groups. Well, in a video I previously uploaded, Proper Nouns. When you say, hatred against racial groups, well, you don't have hatred against racial groups. You have hatred against specific groups. You have hatred against Jews, for example. Now, let's say someone hates Jews. And that's really nobody hates blacks. Okay, let's get real here. They hate Jews. And nobody even hates mestizos. Now, let's say you hate Jews, okay? And the reason you hate Jews is because you believe that Jews are in some sort of mafia-like, informal, wink and a nod, and sometimes explicit conspiracy to control countries, break down their moral structures, make money doing it, and all sorts of horrible conspiracy theories. Okay, so you think someone who believes this and hates Jews because they believe Jews are in fact doing all these things, is this person a racist? Right? Well, let me ask you this. Just for the sake of argument, what if Jews really were doing those things? And so someone hates Jews for that. Well, would that be racist? If you actually believe Jews were inherently this way and inherently doing all those things. Now, you may have a problem in that they're generalizing and that the few Jews who are not doing such a thing are being lumped in with them. So that could be a fair point. But the majority, the bulk of what they're saying is that racist if it's true. Let's say it's correct. Let's say Jews really are, as a group, behaving in the way that the anti-Jew people describe. Is that racist? If it's correct, is it racist? Okay, so real problems here, don't we have? Now, proper nouns. Back in my previous video, I talked about proper nouns. The term racism, now we know what the abstraction is. The abstraction is, well, racism is, let's use one definition. Now, I personally don't, I think that it's a broken term, has so many definitions, and one major problem of it is that when someone calls you racist in front of several other people, well, those other people who are observing the event, what are they thinking? They're thinking their personal definition of racism, right? So let's say Bob defines racism as belief in distinct races. Jim believes racism means hatred of races. Okay, so Bob calls you a racist, and now Jim thinks you hate other races. Right? Bob calls you a racist because you believe in the existence of race, and then Jim thinks you hate them because that's what racism means to him. Right? You see how this works? So, right, it's kind of like me calling you a pedophile because you like kids in a completely non-sexual, normal way. Right? But I say that in front of people, and these other people, they have their own definition of pedophile, which is different from mine. Right? And so they then assume you like kids in a completely sexual way. Right? Same thing happens with racism. Right? Bob says, oh, you believe in the existence of races, or you believe in cognitive differences between races. Right? That's racist. Oh, racist? He's a racist, so obviously he wants to reinstitute slavery and create concentration and liquidation camps and blah blah, right? So the miscalibration of these definitions allows that to happen. But back to what I was saying before about proper nouns, and the abstraction is that racism means, let's use the hate definition. Let's use racial hatred. Racism means some sort of view regarding hatred of other groups, let's say. Let's use that definition for now. Okay, so if you're using that definition in the abstract, okay, well then mestizos could be racist, Africans could be racist, Europeans could be racist, East Asians could be racist, any group could be racist, right? That's the abstraction. Okay, but just because that's the abstraction that you use doesn't mean that's how the term racism is actually being used. Okay, getting away from abstractions and into proper nouns, well, the way racism is typically used is in regards to white people and their views of non-whites, and that's the only direction in which it is used. Okay, and same goes with supremacist, hate group, right? It's always and only white people who are racist, haters, supremacists. Right? Groups like the National Council of the Race, right, is not a hate group because the race is the Amerindian Spanish hybrid peoples, the mestizos, right? That's the race. Okay. Now, if we were to go to the abstraction and deal in the world of ideological abstractions, well then we would imagine that people would be condemning the National Council of La Raza or Mecha or Nation of Islam as being horrible racist institutions. But we live in a world of proper nouns, and that's not how racism is used. Okay? In the world of proper nouns, racism is a response to the perceived behavior of white people. Now, I disagree with a lot of, the historical narrative of the United States at this point, which includes a massive dosing of civil rights, truth, and BS. But it's in that context that the term racism is used. Okay, it's not used in the context of real, genuine racial hatred that other groups have towards white people. Right? Anti-white hate is not treated the same way as white hatred towards other group is. There is a double standard because of where racism, the popularization of the term racism was used for. Right? It was used for European hatred of darkies, to the extent that ever even existed, which I believe is way overblown. Right? Even or especially in the colonial empires, it's not. Anyway, that's the last problem, is the usage of racism as the proper noun. And so when I say, because that's one of the arguments, that, oh, so you're against the usage of the term racism, so that means that you don't think that a mestizo discriminating against an African should be called racism. Well, that's kind of a bullshit question because that's not how it's actually being used. That's more of the ideological formulation of racism. That's not the real world with all of its asymmetries and sinews showing. Okay, that's your little model of racism, where it's actually a consistent and consistently applied thing, but it's not, because the world is not consistent. The world is not symmetrical. Concepts are not applied by people in a symmetrical, consistent fashion. They're applied by people in a historically determined fashion, in a historically contingent and contextual fashion, based on what they were taught in school and other factors. Okay, so it's not a simple formulation that like people say, oh well, you're opposed to using the term racism, so you don't think we should call out. That's not what's happening. That's not how it's actually used. Okay, real world, and I feel like such a, for having so long have made fun of the hard-nosed realists. But I think in this sense, in this specific context, that drawing a distinction between the drawing board and the real world, the discrepancies are so wide that that's one more reason to stop using the term racism. So that's the end of this video here.